Now stop! Stop right there. Yes, you, the one who is about to type no in big block capitals down in the comments section. Now I know we sci-fi fans can get very passionate and reboots don't have a glowing reputation, but that's not really what this video essay is about. This video is actually going to cover a range of topics about pop culture and fandom in general. Unfortunately, those topics don't really make for good titles, which the YouTube algorithm favours a whole lot, which is why the title is as it appears. But while that topic is central to what I'm going to be talking about, it isn't the only thing. So if you can bear with me for now, hold comments until the end, and hopefully we can have some truly interesting conversations down below. Deal? Okay, here we go. So Babylon 5, if you clicked on this video, I assume you know what it is. An epic sci-fi TV show from the 90s, winner of multiple prestigious awards, but never a ratings juggernaut. Since it ended, there was a brief revival with The Lost Tales, but these days its original creator J. Michael Straczynski has been stoking news about a possible reboot, specifically a feature film reboot, as he doesn't own the TV rights. Personally, I don't think rebooting Babylon 5 as a feature film project is a very good idea. Babylon 5 was designed from the ground up as a televisual novel, with a kind of long-form plot and character development expected from a novel. Trying to rework that into a feature film isn't impossible, but it's really quite difficult. But I also don't think any Hollywood studio is going to fork out much money to fund a Babylon 5 movie because Babylon 5 is adored by its fans, and I'm sure has many creative minds who count themselves among those fans. But Babylon 5 is obscure and unknown to most people. Ask a randomer on the street who Captain Kirk is, and they'll probably know you're on about Star Trek. Ask them who the Jedi are, and they'll know you're talking about Star Wars. But ask them about the Rangers, the Shadows, and Minbari, they likely won't have a clue what you're on about. Many say we're in a golden age of television right now, where long-form, intricate and nuanced storytelling is the norm, but many fail to cite Babylon 5 as one of the major pioneers of this kind of storytelling, because, as I said, Babylon 5 isn't popular. And that's perhaps a good point in the camp of, yes, Babylon 5 should be rebooted, not as a movie but as another TV show. Perhaps the best way to popularize this universe, these characters and these stories, is to make them again in an environment perfectly suited to bring them to a much wider audience. Some would counter that more people should simply watch the original show, but there are a couple of obstacles to that end. First off, Babylon 5 isn't the easiest thing to find. It's not on any major streaming platforms, and forking out the cash for a DVD box set is a big ask. Secondly, the versions which currently exist for purchase aren't the most well-maintained copies of the show. Years of neglect means even the finest DVD collections which I own have to deal with some poor transfers and badly kept audio in places. Thirdly, the show itself is simply quite dated from a technical point of view. For some reason a lot of folk get bent out of shape when I said this in a previous Babylon 5 video, but it needs saying. Babylon 5's overall presentation, especially its visual effects, just don't hold up that well. It doesn't mean the storytelling, directing and writing aren't still top notch, but the dated CGI and cheap sets are self-evident. I know the CGI was revolutionary at the time, I know it was done on older equipment, it doesn't really make a difference. The presentation of most Star Trek shows from around the same time holds up way better, but those shows also have the benefit of remasters and well-maintained original copies, but Babylon 5 doesn't have those advantages. Filmmaking is a visual medium after all, and modern audiences can't help but judge things by modern standards. If they can't get immersed in the universe being presented to them, it's difficult to get invested in the story being told within that universe. A modern day reboot, however, would have the benefit of cinematic style TV shows being the norm, and could render its universe with more spectacle and realism than ever before. Modern audiences could buy into the universe of Babylon 5 with far greater ease. Modern audiences also expect more long overarching stories, and thus a reboot wouldn't have pressure from a network trying to bring in a weekly audience for episodic adventures. What the original show had to fight to achieve, a reboot would be able to accomplish right off the bat. In short, TV has finally caught up with Babylon 5. Ultimately what I ask is this: is the best way to popularize Babylon 5 to reboot it as a new show? The original series will always be there for curious newcomers to seek out, and if a modern version is able to become a hit, the original show could be re-released in an easier to find way and in higher quality. Question for you. Why are we in this fandom to begin with? Why are we Babylon 5 fans or Star Trek fans or whatever fans in the first place? This is a question with a lot of answers. There's a terrific essay online by a collection of authors from Grinnell College all about fandoms, which I found quite interesting. But one component I think these essays miss out is connection. A collective passion for a TV show, movie, book, game, or multimedia franchise gives us all avenues to connect with one another. Sharing our likes, dislikes, loves, and hates about certain plot or story elements allows us to connect with one another on an emotional and intellectual level. A fandom can give people common ground to understand each other. It's no wonder the traditionally geeky realms were occupied by people who felt intimidated by the pressures of socialization. It's one of the reasons why gatekeeping is just so absurd and ultimately self-defeating. Saying a person doesn't have the required knowledge to have a conversation with you about something you both clearly love is just petty and nonsensical. The TV landscape is not only far better suited to the kind of show Babylon 5 aims to be, but the audience is more welcoming socially. Traditionally nerdy types of stories have been mainstream for quite a while now. Franchises like the MCU or Game of Thrones could have only hoped for a cult following decades ago, but now they're the biggest brands in media. A reboot would not only potentially introduce a wider audience to Babylon 5, but also introduce fans to one another. There hasn't really been a sci-fi show since Star Trek The Next Generation which really captured the popular consciousness like fantasy shows like Game of Thrones have. I absolutely think Babylon 5 has all the ingredients to do just that. So I bring up a similar question: is the best way to share that connection with people through Babylon 5 to reboot the show? If a reboot brought more people into the Babylon 5 fandom, that, to me at least, can only be a good thing. All this being said, there are a number of legitimate arguments against rebooting Babylon 5. Speculating about the quality of a reboot is kind of a moot point considering no such reboot exists and there's no point arguing over the good or bad writing for a show which isn't being made. Instead, the arguments which have a kind of merit are more to do with the actual necessity for a reboot. Babylon 5 may not be popular, but it has certainly been influential, and the filmmakers and writers who came after certainly took inspiration from the series. One of the most beloved video game franchises of the previous decade has been Mass Effect, and Babylon 5's fingerprints are all over it. A galactic hub of commerce and diplomacy, a history of rivalries and conflicts between major races, the need to unite in the face of a returning overwhelming threat, etc. Much of this can be chalked up to genre tropes, but the general approach to world building is eerily reminiscent of J. Michael Straczynski's work. While Babylon 5 in its day was only able to snag a cult following, Mass Effect was a blockbuster franchise, and similarly developed a spin-off which completely belly-flopped. Meanwhile, in the world of TV, The Expanse at times feels like a spiritual successor to Babylon 5, occupying a similar place in the sci-fi TV landscape. Much like Babylon 5 at the time, The Expanse willfully flips genre conventions on their heads for an often richer storytelling experience. So with these spiritual successors of Babylon 5 achieving the widespread success which Babylon 5 never quite managed to reach, is a Babylon 5 reboot really needed all that much? If an epic galactic space opera has already become a blockbuster video game franchise, and a trope-defying series has already become a highly successful streaming series, what would a new Babylon 5 show really add? These are questions I don't have definitive answers to. As I mentioned before, I think a new Babylon 5 would have all the ingredients to be a runaway smash hit in today's TV landscape, but at the same time, stories of similar spirit have already been successful and I've enjoyed them immensely. So instead, these are questions I would put to you, the viewer. So, if a Babylon 5 reboot ever did happen, what's the best way to go about it? Obviously, remaking the show with the exact same story beats and dialogue would be pointless. And with the idea that this would be a premium streaming show, a reboot could dispense with a lot more of the disposable Babylon 5 episodes. And while JMS and co were able to get most of what they wanted on screen, the tumultuous production towards the end of the show meant a few plotlines had to be rushed and changed here and there. So not only can a reboot render these familiar stories on screen again, it actually has the chance to do them even better than before. Seeing as how I've done a previous video about my idea for a Battlestar Galactica reboot, I thought I'd throw in my 2 cents here. So basically, my idea for a new take on Babylon 5 can be boiled down to a single sentence. Make Susan Ivanova the protagonist. It's as simple as that. Looking back on the show, I always felt like Ivanova had some unfulfilled potential. Let's remind ourselves of a few things. As the Shadow War kicks off, we discover that telepaths can be used as an effective weapon against the Shadows, which is why the Shadows themselves infiltrated the Psi Corps and used it to install the President Clark regime. Ivanova has a long-standing hatred of the Psi Corps for what they did to her mother, and we later find out that she herself is a latent telepath. You see where I'm going with this? The ultimate big bad of the universe is the Shadows, and the ultimate villain of the Clark regime is the Psy-Corps, both of which Ivanova has the natural ability and emotional drive to fight. What I think would be cool is if a new Babylon 5 would have a kind of shifting central hero, similar to what Game of Thrones did. At first, Ned Stark was our guy, and then it was Robb Stark, then Daenerys Targaryen for a wee bit, and finally Jon Snow. A new Babylon 5 could have the main hero start as Sinclair, shift to Sheridan, and then have Ivanova lead the charge for the finale. This is complete speculation on my part, but this always seemed like the original plan to me. But because of the rushed production of the 4th season, the Psy-Corps seemed to factor a lot less into the take-back of Earth, and in Season 5 when the Psy-Corps does get some focus back, Claudia Christian had left, and Lockley took over command of the station, a role which I always felt like should have gone to Ivanova. By just tweaking the dynamics of the characters and their arcs, I think this would create a pretty fresh take on the series. It wouldn't just replicate what we've seen before, which is really what a good reboot should be about. Also, if I had to cast it right now, Ivanova should probably be played by Jodie Comer. So, should Babylon 5 be rebooted? It's really annoying that I don't have a definitive answer for this one. I hope I've outlined reasons why I think a reboot would actually be a great thing, but at the same time there are plenty of good points against such a thing. As I said with my previous long-winded video essay about Star Trek Insurrection, I hope these interesting topics actually get some play in the comments section. Ricky Spanish asks, what are your thoughts on the show Killjoys? I've only watched the first season of that, and don't have any plans to make a video about it. I thought it was okay overall. Hannah John Kamen was awesome, but the other two were just incredibly bland. The concept and world are cool, but pretty generically executed. I don't really have any desire to watch any more, to be honest. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do and want to see more videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, join me over on my Patreon where you can see videos like this early. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one. And as always, live long and prosper.